Good morning, friends. This is Pastor Ginny with the Daily Word. I'm wrapping up this week in which we've considered the question, when have you felt furthest from God and when have you felt closest to God, as we continue in this Expectations sermon series. I hope that you've taken some time, or you will take some time, to consider your own answer to that question. And as I thought about how I wanted to answer, I realized that the two situations that I can remember where I felt furthest from God and closest to God, they were actually really similar situations in my life. One happened in seminary. This is the one where I felt far away from God. And one happened more in more recent years during my time here. And they both had to do with a sort of crisis point in the sense of decision making, that decisions needed to be made that were going to drastically impact what the future of my life looked like. And one had to do with my career path, the one in seminary, what my future in ministry would look like, and the other, more recently, was more relational in my personal life. And so they both required a lot of discernment. They both were extremely difficult situations. And so I had to ask myself, why in the first situation did I feel far from God, and why in the second situation did I feel so close to God, when these times were both so difficult and so similar? And the conclusion I've come to throughout this week, as I've thought about this, is the difference was made in the second situation because I had either learned or had remembered what God's voice in me sounds like, what God's Spirit in me sounds like. I think in the first situation, I was surrounded by all these outside voices that had my best interests at heart, but they were sort of drowning out that voice of God that I believe resides in all of us, the image of God, the Spirit of God that resides in all of us. I hadn't yet learned how to listen for that voice. I hadn't yet learned what it sounded like, because I think it sounds different for all of us. And I hadn't yet learned the practices that ground me and give me space and give me room and make me more able to hear that voice. The second situation, which was, 5 or 6 years later, by then I had grown in my faith, and I had experienced enough to know what those practices, what those rhythms of life were, that would create that space for me, that I could be aware of God's voice and God's direction, that voice that is so kind for me. That experience of God's Spirit is so kind and so gentle, maybe convicting, but never critical, never cruel. So for me, if you know me, some of those practices are writing, the practice of journaling, of walking, of being outside, being sort of grounded in the earth in some way. And so I think that the difference for me, when I think about those two situations, has to do with either losing myself in the chaos of the situation, the chaos around me, all the advice, all the voices around me, or being so rooted and so grounded in God's Spirit in me that all the chaos just seems to sort of fade into the background. It's still there. All the considerations, all the complexities of the situation are still present, but my path forward became very clear. Because of that ability, that space, that room to listen to that voice. It's like God cut through all the noise, and it was very clear at each point what my next step should be, what the next right thing to do was. So I hope that in some way that might be encouraging to you, whatever situation you might find yourself in. If you find yourself at some sort of crisis point or decision point in the near future, or maybe you're at one right now, what are those practices that allow you to attune yourself to that voice of God in you? Like I said, it looks different for everybody. It may not be sitting and meditating for a certain amount of time, or it may be, like I said, for me, it's more about movement and walking and kind of an active type of listening. But find what those things are for you. I'm reminded of the words in all of this of Psalm 139, and I've used these words, I think, a lot recently, but this is a psalm that I return to over and over. And that psalmist says to God, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you're there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. So friends, be encouraged whatever you may be walking through this week, that God was there before you, that God will be there after you, and that God walks with you all along the way. Be well.